All right, it's a little after 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second virtual Women in Plastics event of 2020. My name is Whitney Nelson, and I'm the Director of Meetings and Events at IAPD. And if this is your first Women in Plastics event today, welcome. We're so glad you could join us. We know we have a lot of first-timers and new faces on the call, so we want to kick things off with a short video of what IAPD and Women in Plastics is all about. Let's take a look.
The International Association of Plastics Distribution, IAPD, is the only trade association dedicated to the performance plastics distribution supply chain. As an employee of an IAPD member company, you receive all the benefits IAPD has to offer, from education and training to networking, professional development, and publications. IAPD member companies are the leaders in the performance plastics distribution industry and are dedicated to promoting distribution as the way to market. Everything IAPD does is based on these three strategic pillars: to grow and protect the performance plastics industry, improve the knowledge, performance, and capability of IAPD members, and to make the distribution channel the path of choice. The association is your source for plastics distribution networking, training tools, education, information, and insight. One of the ways we accomplish our mission is through the Women in Plastics initiative. Women in Plastics is committed to supporting women through mentoring, education, and personal and professional development to attract, retain, and advance women within the plastics industry. We focus on the distinct needs of women in plastics by promoting leadership and education focused on women in the plastics industry, providing resources needed for successful career advancement, encouraging work-life balance, and giving back to the community through various philanthropic endeavors.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cynthia Snell, and I'm the Vice Chair of Women in Plastics. I got involved with Women in Plastics in 2016 when I attended my first workshop in Atlanta. The impact from meeting all the wonderful ladies committed to showcasing the contributions of women and creating a community around education and development for our industry is the reason I am here with all of you today and excited to be hosting today's virtual session. IAPD Women in Plastics is committed to promoting, advancing, and sustaining women in the performance plastics industry while emphasizing the need for greater diversity in management and in leadership. I am personally very proud to be part of such a dedicated group of professionals who share in this mission for our industry. And best of all, I have been very fortunate to meet a lot of new people, many of whom today I consider close personal friends. If this is your first Women in Plastics event today, I hope you will take the time to make new connections and take the first steps in engaging within our community. We'd love for you to get involved with Women in Plastics through our LinkedIn group, by joining our common interest group, or simply by participating in our upcoming virtual events this year. We have some great sessions planned and some new ways to engage and connect virtually. We don't want you to miss out. I would like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors for making our virtual event series possible. A special thank you to our world-class sponsors, Kerbel Plastics, Mitsubishi Chemical Advanced Materials, North American Plastics, and Simona America Group. I'd also like to give a shout out to our elite sponsor, Cartier-Wilson. Each of these companies shares the mission and vision of Women in Plastics, and we would not be able to put on our programs or events without their tremendous support and generosity. I would now like to encourage all of you to close out of your email or whatever document it is on your screen and really allow yourself to engage for the next 90 minutes. Today's exciting session with Jess Pettitt will provide timely information on diversity in the workplace that everyone can use. Thank you for being here, and we hope you enjoy the program.
It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Jess Pettitt. Jess has been stirring up difficult conversations for over a decade, performing as a stand-up comic, speaking on stage as a diversity educator, and moving teams from abstract to action. Helping us become the change we want to be, please help me welcome from Eureka, California, Jess Pettitt.
Hello, it's not 2020 unless someone talks with their mute on. I'm very excited to be here. And what I'm most excited about is, number one, I have favorite smells. So let's get that out of the way, right? Because icebreakers are super important. So first off, my favorite smell is Vicks Vapor Rub. And it kind of only happens like a seasonal thing, and then it sneaks up on you, and it makes me very happy. Biggest pet peeve is mailing stuff to people and not getting a thank you, not just in the Southern way, like be nice, but like, I don't know if it got there. Like, did it fit? Did you like it? Can I get any feedback? I made a guess. Nothing? Great. Thank you very much. That's a pet peeve. And number three, things that I crave. There was an older woman in my family reunion. I don't even know who she was. She could have been a stranger. I don't know, but she came every year. And she made a lemon chess pie. And then the women in my family were all jerks. Men too, because they had recipes for barbecue. And they never wrote anything down. So that lemon chess pie is in the grave. And that is what I crave, that pie. Now that we got that out of the way, shall we talk about diversity? Yeah, so at the beginning, y'all put in a little chat window, what do you think about diversity? And it's a trick question. And the reason why is because you're all wrong. I have been trying forever and ever and ever to try not to make a diversity training that was virtual, because I think this needs to be talked about in person, and it can be a very difficult topic for people, and then they get all sad and weird and all that kind of stuff. And I work with enough clients that have like third shifts or people who work overnight, or you can't like shut a hospital down to like go to a diversity training. So kicking and screaming, I made a virtual program. And it is completely based on what most people think diversity training isn't. So today is a starting place, because everyone always answers the question wrong. Diversity is not something that is just external to you. And if we start talking about equitable opportunities and inclusion and who we intentionally exclude or unintentionally include, then we need to have a very different conversation. And that conversation starts with you. So the journey that you're about to take, buckle up, is not what you're expecting. And now I have warned you, and you're still here. So let's move. First, those of you that are going to be watching the recording, and y'all at work, you got coworkers, some of you are sheltering in place and you're in a room by yourself, but you're probably going to have a question. And I am in your pocket forever in a creepy, warm gummy bear kind of way. Shout out to Ferris Bueller. But what you need to do is write down a texting number. So you can text message me any question or any comment that you want at any point in time, and I will answer you or make something up. So the texting number is 202-670-4262. So you feel free to text message anything you want to. Now, some of you got some like real chisme to be able to share, and you're like, what do you mean by share things? If you put DR at the beginning of your text message, I will not read it aloud, but I will still answer it. So just depending on like what power dynamics are at place, I don't know who's dating who's hiring who's fired who's applying for whose job. I don't know any of that stuff. So if you don't want me to read it aloud, then you are welcome to put DR at the beginning, which stands for don't read. I will read it. I just won't read it aloud. But you can use this texting number. Those of you watching the recording later on, if I have done my job, I will be thought-provoking, and chances are you're going to have a question later on. So might as well be able to ask me when you have that question later on. So again, 202-670-4262 is the texting number. That is that piece. Now, I told you that I would kicked and screamed about creating this program. I believe if we're going to do an online program, you have to start like before zero. So a lot of times, and just because I'm some kind of masochist, I have attended probably 400 hours of online diversity training, Yawnsville. So you don't have to go to those trainings, and this is not those trainings. But I did try to figure out like what all do they jam pack into this 45-minute thing so it looks like defensive driving class, and you can check email at the same time. So then I wanted to take it and I pulled it all apart. So instead of kind of skipping rocks and just barely talking about uncomfortable topics shallow enough that you'll maybe multitask, what I'm going to do is mostly just talk about you. What that means is you are going to be like, is she talking to me? I am. So we're going to talk about like your lived experience, my lived experience. Who are you? Welcome to a conversation about diversity and social justice work that actually involves you and not based on some like Tennessee Williams glass menagerie collection of all the different people and experiences and food that gives us all gas. That is a different kind of workshop, and that's not what's happening today. What I want us to do is to be able to pay attention to who you are, how you got that way, and acknowledge that there are parts that are awesome and you should keep those parts. There might be some things that you're like, oh yeah, I totally unlearned that thing. Maybe there's other things you need to unlearn or relearn. Maybe there's some new vocabulary words you've never heard, but kids these days with their vocab, who knows? There's also going to be things that just float in the middle. They're just incongruent. And that's fine, but at least you're being conscious of who you are and how you are. And the starting place of diversity work is being responsible for who and how you are. So however you showed up today, whatever level of hot mess this Wednesday may be for you, is what we're going to work with, because it's the common denominator of every relationship you're in. For some people, that is very bad news, but it's what we got to work with. So if we are going to start at a fundamental starting place, I need to tell you that I am making one giant assumption. So we're not going to politicize this, except yes, we are. And what I mean by that is that when libertarianism was kind of on the rise again, some of you may recall, maybe even are wearing a t-shirt now that is representative of the Tea Party. That is fine. I have read Milton Friedman. I'm totally down with this. Libertarianism and like other political parties, the main difference that I and my random triple Virgo-ness is, what are you responsible for? And you are either responsible for yourself, party of one, or you are responsible for something much bigger than you. That seems to be when like this polarizing giant, we can't talk about those topics. Whatever it is, they boil down to, that's none of my business, or this is my business. That's it. So I am going to function on the assumption that we have responsibility to people greater than us. And the only tool we really have to do anything with that responsibility to people greater than ourselves is ourself. And we can only do work on ourselves. That is the assumption that I make basically in all of my work. A friend of mine who's a Muslim, she said that in her interpretation of her faith and culture is that there is a saying that you are responsible for 40 houses out. So wherever your house is, 40 houses out is where your responsibility is. 41st house down the block, they on their own. You just got to worry about these folks, but your next door neighbors are responsible for them. See how that works? So that's a general assumption. You may also be familiar with the concept of like 7 years out, or people you've never even met yet, maybe not 7 years, 7 generations even, they're not even born yet. That is what I mean by kind of the concept of collective responsibility. So that is a baseline assumption that I am making. And if we're going to talk about the starting place, I need to be like forthcoming with my baseline assumptions. Now, it is also important to understand that in a starting place, sometimes you have no control over what happens. Now, I do not have any children. You're welcome. But some people do have children, and they think they have complete and total control of the child, even in utero. That's a different conversation and totally a different workshop. This is my friend Julie and her son Jimmy, who's now like 20 because, I don't know, time. It's amazing. But while we were taking these photographs, I had this very powerful moment where I understood one of these academic terms that get thrown around all the time in diversity conversations is this idea of ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism is the idea that you and your lived experience is completely at the center. Now, I'm originally from Texas, go Texas, and there is a very large map making company, or at least there was in Texas before I fled at high school graduation. And you can always tell when a US map was one of the ones that was made in the company in Texas, because Texas was in the center of the sheet of paper, and it looks significantly larger than California and Alaska. Why? Well, some smarty people would say, well, you're making a three-dimensional object into a two-dimensional object, so it's already going to be skewed. Yes, that is true, unless you're like a flat glober person, which is also a different workshop. So if we're making a 3D image or thing into a two-dimensional thing, it's already going to be weird. But then we extra weird it up because of where we're from, we put that in the center. And then everything else just gets squeezed in. But that's the piece that we need to be responsible for. First off, none of it is true because it's not a three-dimensional thing, it's a two-dimensional thing. But it is also significantly skewed by virtue of our experience and how we look at that and how we don't look at that. And that is something we can be responsible for. If we can understand what it means holding our experience into the center, shh, don't tell anyone, but it will actually make us better listeners for other people because they also have an experience that they are holding in the center. Don't tell anyone because I got a mortgage to pay, but that's really the secret. Now, when we start talking about words, equity and inclusion may be words that you hear about. So let me kind of explain what I mean there. We started kind of using the word equality, and I'll talk more about language, but I don't like to use the word equality because basically what it means is providing exactly the same thing to everyone, but not everybody needs exactly the same thing. So the idea of using equity is that you would give the same opportunity to different people and then customize it based on their needs. So if we were to use shoes, for example, I wear a size 11 woman's shoe. That is only helpful for some people, and most of them are men. Because I have really, really, really big feet, I'm not going to wear heels. I'm not going to do that kind of stuff. But depending on what shoe gets doled out equally to everyone, that either is going to be helpful to your foot size, that's going to be helpful to your back posture, and you also have to take like your life considerations into whether or not these shoes are helpful to you. That's equity. Because what you're doing is if you're trying to provide shoes for everyone, you need to provide shoes that fit the person and their needs, which involves like listening and conversation and relationships and bluff. It's so much easier just to order like 100 pair of size 11 shoes, don't you think? That's how most diversity trainings treat equality, when in reality, we need to actually slow down enough to include the person with their own dose of ethnocentrism into a conversation to figure out what does this person in this moment need. And the best part is we're all just narcissistic enough that we are often that person. So we need to have a conversation with ourselves about what is it that we need in the given moment. And in order to do that, you have to be able to know kind of who and how you are in the world. So you may also hear dominant and subordinated identities. So what I mean here isn't ones that you like think about the most or like whether or not you're paying attention to that or not. What I mean are the ones that kind of magically come with unicorn points. Most of us didn't do anything to get the unicorn points. Most of us didn't do anything to not get the unicorn points. But these like social constructions of identities, if I can sound like an academic again, is doles out these unicorn points and they're dependent on the other one. So I, for example, identify as a white person. We live on a globe where suddenly that really does mean something. Why? I don't know, but it does. And that's also a different workshop. So then I get all these unicorn points because I appear to be a white person. Now, what kind of white person am I? I don't tan. I'm more team vampire. So we can have that like sub conversation about what it means. But a dominant identity, if we're talking about a racial identity, which is the socially constructed category, my answer to the socially constructed category is that I identify as a white person, which comes with unicorn points. Therefore, that is a dominant or privileged identity. Whereas I may also have some identities that are subordinated or marginalized or minoritized by different socially constructed identities. So then I have less unicorn points. So that would be a subordinated identity. That's how you can think about systems of oppression in a way that's ideally not as like super threatening, because like I said, most of us did not choose to do anything to gain unicorn points or to lose unicorn points. And we don't really even know who doled them out in the first place. We have some hypotheses, but that's also a different workshop. Okay, so here's a little bit about me. So my subordinated identities. So I encourage you, if you're playing the home game, grab some paper and map yourself out. It's a fun little conversation to have with yourself. What subordinated identities do you have, and which ones are visible and which ones are invisible? What's fun about these identities is they don't have to be accurate. Someone else could perceive them about you and it's not even true, but you're either going to get the unicorn points or you're not based on their perception. So fun. That's what happens when it's socially constructed. So, for example, I identify as a lesbian or a queer person. That's probably not shocking. I have short pink hair in the middle of a pandemic. That's what lesbians do, is have good hair in the middle of a pandemic. Thank you very much. So that's usually a pretty visible thing because I'm like walking around, right? I also identify as a non-Christian. Technically speaking, my religious or spiritual identity or practices are not necessarily visible. I was raised by 2 atheists in Texas, the only 2, I think. And I probably identify more as agnostic, but we really would need to have a long conversation, and we can't even actually sit at a table together. So that's not going to happen. But because I don't seem to have any kind of cultural practices that are perceived because of unicorn points, I'm just assumed to be Christian. What is also amazing is depending on where you are in the country, that either means Catholic or Protestant. It doesn't just mean Christian, it means a certain kind of Christian. And even though I was not raised with the Christian faith in any way, I know every song of every Christmas song, or every word is what I was going to say, to every Christmas song, even though I don't celebrate Christmas. Why? Because it's everywhere, and that's a thing, right? So I also have some physical ability issues. Fun fact, I don't like asking for help, so hopefully you'll never know about them. But there may be times where I'm like, why don't we just have a seat? And that could be because I'm popping my hip back into place or because I'm lazy. You'll never know. But it's invisible that I actually have some ability issues. But the reason why they're mostly invisible is because I don't like asking for help. I identify as a woman. That is usually fairly visible. And sometimes maybe not, but like my name is Jessica. I have a woman-ish voice. So there's a lot of things that get compiled together that people just assume that I would identify as a woman. Now, my dominant identity, same thing. Some are visible, some are invisible. Please feel free to play the home game. Doesn't mean that they're always accurate, whether or not you do or you don't get the unicorn points. But I often get unicorn points for this stuff. So first off, I said I already identify as white. I am also a US citizen. Unless I'm walking around with my passport, that's technically not visible. But how I use language kind of conflates with education and class and things like this. So even if you're just listening on the phone, you usually can think I'm a native English speaker, I'm probably a US citizen, I'm probably white, I'm probably at least middle class, and I have a lot of education. Just because my name's Jessica and how I talk. Not everybody gets those unicorn points. I am also legally married. Fun fact, I was actually legally married before gay marriage was legal, and I married a man. Some of you right now are like, excuse me, you said you were a lesbian, that's not the definition. Who cares about facts, right? This doesn't matter. Imagine what it's like being in this relationship, and now we're sheltering in place together. I've been home more with him for the last 6 months than I have for the last 15 years. It is making me ask questions, but that is a different workshop. I'm almost 50. Some of you did not perceive that. P.S. This is when you put into the chat, oh my gosh, I didn't think you were a day over, pick a number way below 50. I have good skin, but it is not necessarily visible that I am starting to get AARP things in the mail. So that's an important thing to understand because age is also relative. There are times where I'm in the space where, for example, I was on a phone call the other day where somebody was talking about something and I had absolutely, it was an acronym. Oh, TikTok, that's what it was. It's not an acronym. I thought it was an onomatopoeia. They didn't know what onomatopoeia was. Then we got off. Anyway, I don't know what a TikTok is. Why would I need to know that, right? I don't know what an Instagram either. That sounds like a venereal disease. I don't know these things. So I'm like the oldest person in the room. And then 3 seconds later, I'm talking to my husband and he mentions somebody like James Taylor, who I have no idea who he's talking about. So I'm like going through past historical presidents, trying to figure out who James Taylor is because I didn't grow up with that kind of music. So age can be relative based on where you're at. I am a flaming extrovert. I bet that that's probably visible even virtually. And it's because I'm trapped in this damn house. So that is a visible thing, and depending on where you are, you'll either get points or you won't get points for that. And I do have way more education than anybody would need, largely because I'm pretty good at school. Not very good at much anything else, but that was pretty much it. People are yelling at me in chat that I don't know who James Taylor is. I had to figure it out. So I listened to James Taylor. The joke still applies. Same thing goes with some guy named Jim Croce, who I like better than James Taylor. And my husband had never seen Princess Bride. How did I marry him? I know, the blasphemous. Okay, so if you can do your own schedule, right? Now, normally, if you're in a boring diversity training, let's all map out our social identity, shall we? It can be a fun experience because it doesn't actually matter what is true. It matters how people perceive you, whether they give you the unicorn points or they take the unicorn points away. So if you can practice this and become aware of when you magically are given unicorn points or when you are magically taking them away from other people or not, that's kind of the beginning of the responsibility work. And it doesn't have to be a guilt, shame-ridden kind of experience because it's not actually based on facts. It's based on people's perceptions. It's based on what you think is important about you and what you don't really think is that important about you. So if you can do this kind of report card and you begin to kind of understand how equity and inclusion works and what your dominant identities are, those are the ones that give you the unicorn points, and the subordinated or marginalized or minoritized identities, those are the ones where unicorn points are sucked out of your ATM machine. If you can realize that, now we can actually begin to have a conversation. What happens so often is that we pitch this conversation, first off, external to ourselves, or we just pitch it from our subordinated places. And where that is really good, community organizing from your subordinated places is a survival mechanism. It's fantastic for the t-shirt and bumper sticker industry as well. But if we could actually organize from our dominant or privileged identities, it doesn't cost anything. Literally, it does not cost anything. There's no risk to do work from your dominant identities, but we don't often spend time even reporting what are our perceived dominant identities. So again, the starting place. So power and privilege comes up all the time in these conversations. What does that mean? I personally do not like the word minority or minoritized because it comes with some kind of mathematical situation that is usually not accurate. What I mean by that is that it's not about having less people, it's about having less unicorn points. There's often way more people who have less unicorn points than the few people who have all the unicorn points. So then math doesn't apply. So the way that I think about power and privilege is who has the opportunity to dole out and who is seeking that opportunity or who could be receiving that opportunity. So if you do math, there doesn't have to be that many people on one side of this, and there can be a ton of people on the other side. But I ask you, are these two folks opening the door or are they closing the door? And if they're opening the door, is that power? Or is that privilege? Or is that, if they're closing the door, is that power or privilege? The truth is we don't know, but we kind of instantly come up with a judgment based on what we think is happening in the picture. And that is actually where our lived experience can inform power and privilege. So that's a really kind of important piece. Okay, so if we do this, that makes total sense. Yes, she's so funny. I didn't even know I was gonna laugh. This is great. So then I mentioned all that stuff and you're like, but wait, Jess, what about them? Right? So I've never met your uncle. I don't know Todd or Barbara or whoever it is. Yes, you're right. They're totally annoying. An expert has told you. Yes, they're annoying. But the funny thing about us and them is grammar. And what I mean by that is that we would never, ever behave in such a terrible, horrible way. That's always them over there. Bleh, them. And that's how we get all polarized and we pick teams, right? So what's interesting is that my us, my we, is their them. So it doesn't make any sense because I can be completely convinced that I am right, but someone else sees me as wrong. This is why polarization doesn't work. That is also a different workshop. So it's about who we think is right. Well, of course I am right. Duh. Usins are right. They, them ones over there, they are wrong. Let me tell you how they are wrong. I don't need a speech. I have an uncle too. But if them is wrong, then they see me as them, therefore they see me as wrong. Them and us doesn't work. And ultimately, when we start talking about responsibility, we're responsible for ourselves. But if we say ourselves and then everyone else is a them, we're not actually like distributing our responsibility out to a broader sense of a community. So in my book, I came up with the idea of differently right. That person is not necessarily, cussing filter in, a donkey. We are all donkeys because we are all super annoying. Everything we do is super frustrating to somebody. That's just gonna happen. So then I always get asked, but Jessica, I really would like to be able to interact with the humankind, but I don't want to be offensive. What do I do? Thinking that you could be above offending someone is offensive. It's not about never being offensive. No one has figured that out. What it's about is recognizing that unconscious bias, unconscious offensiveness means you don't know it happened. You can't know it happened if it's by definition unconscious. So what we need to do is engage completely prepared to offend someone. We are like half an hour into this and some of y'all are like, she was not kidding with this buckle up business. Some of you are like, I had plans during this webinar and I'm laughing. I can't read my own emails. I'm mad at her. I am responsible for all of that impact, whether it was intentional or not. And I'm so sorry about it. But this is what I mean by differently right. In my book, I came up with this concept of differently right. This is not moral relativism. I married a philosophy professor. I believe in only one sense of morality. We can talk about that later. But what I mean is that if everybody's life taught them, this is how I'm supposed to show up, that does not mean you agree with it. It just means that throughout their life, surviving their life taught them that this is the way. This is the way I feel the most prepared and the most safe. Then I can have a conversation with them. They can still be wrong, but their life taught them that this is how you're supposed to do it. Okay, well now I'm engaging with someone I am convinced is wrong, but I'm at least like giving some space of grace because their life taught them to be wrong this way. Just like my life taught me to be wrong this way. Now we can have a conversation because we're actually being responsible for who and how we are. If we can be responsible for who and how we are, then the perceptions we have of other people actually become more accurate because the perceptions are based on who that person actually is and not just who we need them to be to feel safe and prepared. If we can do that for other people, it's usually way easier to do this externally than it is internally, but that's what I'm for. If we can do the internal work, then and only then will we actually be able to be responsible for who and how we are. Now, I like to use colonization as a nice light icebreaker into the diversity conversation. So what I mean here is I want to talk about how worldviews, which is all this stuff smooshed together, how worldviews cause problems. Okay, so if we were to take Western expansion as an example, some people call it a failed attempt at genocide, but that might actually be a little advanced for some. So let's call it Western expansion. So what happens is a bunch of white dudes came over from Western Europe. Even though they had queens, it is a patriarchal society over there in Western Europe where men people are the leaders. Okay, great. So the men people who are the leaders, let's just bypass that most of these people were like avoiding prison and or thought England was too wild. So they came this way to like be more conservative. So they come over here and all of a sudden there's all these people here. They were not planning that. There are all these people here and they're like, take me to your leader. And women showed up. Well, because they come from a patriarchal culture, they think these women are like the welcome wagon. Like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for the blankets. But what ended up happening is that some of those folks actually had a matriarchal society, which means take me to your leader. I don't know what's going on. Probably didn't have a language barrier. So maybe the leader came out all on their own. And because of the patriarchal worldview, they were like, oh, hi, welcome wagon. And they went and found the closest man and assumed that that man was the leader. Fun facts, right? Not the best bargaining system, but that is what happened. Now, what also happened, and I'm going to come on this side now, is that from the indigenous populations, when you start like signing documents that you own things, If your worldview doesn't own Earth, you don't own land, you don't own the planet because you actually share it, then you can sign these things, but you don't really necessarily understand what it is either, because your worldview is not connected to land ownership. It's connected to sharing. So you got miscommunication here, you got miscommunication here, and surprise, hundreds and hundreds of years later, it's still pretty bad, right? This is what I mean, in that if we can't learn from our historical mistakes, y'all are doing this today. I am doing this today. I show up with my worldview and assume you have it, and then we start communicating with each other, and it's shocking that I would have job security, isn't it? All we have to do is like stop doing that part. But no, that's okay. That's why I bought a house. So we also come up with all these little symbols to like warn us about what is happening. So why not take bathrooms? Another lighthearted diversity topic that people love to talk about. So there's usually a little sign on the door that has a little stick figure on it. So when you open the bathroom, only people who would be inside is the stick figure. Except by logic, this don't make sense because the individual carrying the briefcase is not a stick figure and is entering the room. So then what happens is who enters that room gets policed based on who's supposed to be in that room. But stick figures, in my 46 years, I've never actually seen a stick figure in a bathroom, including I've never seen one wearing a cape either. Nope. So I usually see like humanoids, sometimes children. I don't know if they're humanoids, but I see them in the space, and then I have to determine whether or not I feel safe with them in there or not in there, even though the sign on the door told me completely different expectations. So when I help people, like how do we put better signs on doors? I'd say, what happens in this space versus who's supposed to be in this space? And they're like, why would we do that? We don't talk about what happens in this space. And I was like, I understand that, but you have a conference room, right? What happens in the conference room? Well, people sit at the conference table. Oh, look at that. That's what they do in that room, right? You don't have to say that this is where the important people sign documents. You don't have to get all specific, but what happens in the room? So then if you put a sign that's like, there is a toilet in here, fun facts, also a sink. Now we know what's in the room, and then people who need a toilet and or a sink would be able to use that room. But that's not typically how we talk about it, because we bring all of this story that we then smush into a symbol and then hope everyone else has the same definition of the symbol that you've never actually seen in the space. That actually doesn't make any sense. You could stop doing that too. But again, job security. So I like to take a little pause, because some of y'all in the introduction missed the part that I am like an extroverted fire hose of diversity information. So in this pause, I would like to give you kind of a moment. Again, you can text message me at 202-670-4262 on the off chance that you have any questions or comments or thoughts as it's coming up. I also think that it's important I use a lot of optical illusions, but I have this one actually tattooed on my arm as a reminder that I don't actually know everything. So even if you're asking a question, you're asking me a question because you need the answer, that's cool. But as soon as I say, you might not know everything, people are like, well, I don't know about that. How many legs does an elephant have? Usually it's 4. So then when you see this, it messes with your head a little bit. And actually that was MC Escher's point. My point is slow down, because sometimes somebody else actually has a point that's different than the one you assume is present. So you have to engage in an actual conversation or an actual relationship with what is actually occurring, or you miss what is actually occurring. That's all. So I don't have any text yet, but it's in the chat too, 202-670-4262. Feel free, but we will keep going. So we like to quote dead people, primarily dead people that we've assassinated. What's fun about Gandhi is Gandhi was so annoying, he was assassinated by his own people. Not an enemy, just a coworker who was like, you know what, I've had it. Some of you actually work with a Gandhi, so you should be a little careful. It is important to understand, though, that the premise of what it is we do is the building block for everything that we become. It's a building block for our whole society. It's a building block for who and how we are in the world. That sounds great and makes fabulous t-shirts, but we don't actually do that. And then people are like, but Jess, how do we start? What do we do first? I don't know. Stop doing what you're doing that you think you're not doing. That would be step one. But in order to do that, you have to be reflective with yourself to be able to figure out who you are and how you are. And extra bonus, how did your life teach you to be that way? Then we can actually start talking about beliefs and thoughts and words and actions and habits and values and how that's actually representative of a larger community. Some of you may be familiar with the golden rule. The golden rule, basically, if I summarize like 30 plus religions, is be nice to people, treat people the way you want to be treated. But I don't actually think that's really that nice. What if you don't want to be treated the way I want to be treated? I think that that's fat. Example, I have been fired from every job I've ever had. Honestly, who's surprised? However, every job that has ever fired me has brought me back at a significantly higher fee as a consultant. A departing flight is a very important part of my personality. Excellent. If I were to say, Andy, do you want to go to lunch? That gives Andy the opportunity to say yes or no. But if I say, Andy, we're going to lunch, and I ordered an extra large green olive pizza with extra amounts of green olives, that only works. One, if Andy wants to go to lunch with me. Two, if Andy likes pizza or is in the mood for pizza. Or three, likes green olives. Green olives happen to be my favorite pizza topping, but most human beings do not experience the bliss and joy of green olives on a pizza, which is why it's very hard to find as a topping in any pizza place. What is wrong with this world? But that is the case. Now, if I apply the golden rule, I have assumed that you want to go to lunch with me. I have assumed you are also craving pizza, and why not my favorite kind of pizza? That's the golden rule. The idea of going one step further is actually Tony Alessandra's work that I use in my book that is all about the platinum rule. And the idea of the platinum rule is that you treat people the way they actually want to be treated. But in order to treat people the way they actually want to be treated, I gotta like listen, I gotta like ask questions, I gotta like engage in some kind of relationship building situation. Ugh. That's what you need to do, though, in order to actually find out if someone wants to go to lunch with you. And if you do want to go to lunch with me, what kind of food do you want? And if you do want that kind of food, where should we go? I would like to just take a moment. Remember going to places where there was food. I remember. That was a lovely minute. Thank you. Worldview is a limitation that we are capable of adjusting. So those of you from Texas, I'm about to speak very controversially about the main religion in the state of Texas, which is college football. Some of you may recall sporting events. They were a thing. So in Texas, before you can walk, you have to pick if you are an Aggie or a Longhorn. It's a thing. If you're not from Texas, I'm sure there's some equivalent in your state, but it doesn't matter because I'm from Texas, which is actually the only state. So you are either an Aggie or you are a Longhorn, and that is the rules. I went to college out of state because I am not only the child of two atheists raised by two Baptist families, but one of them was an Aggie and one of them was a Longhorn. It is a mystery I survived. So this is a picture of my friend Dan. Now, as someone who used to travel for a living, one of the complete random things is I get to visit my friends all the time, and I just happened to be visiting when his wife went into labor with their first kid. So Dan, as you may notice, is a Longhorn fan. So when he literally held his son for the very first time, the very first thing Dan said to his son is, "I can't wait to take you to a Longhorns game." Now, the reason why this is relevant, because this is an after-school special, of course, his son graduated with honors, valedictorian or whatever it's called, I don't know, from Texas A&M, because that's how children work, I hear, and that's why I don't have them. So when the son decided to go to Texas A&M, the rival school, Dan had the option of disowning his child for making bad life choices, but chose not to because he actually loves his kid. So even though bad life choices were made by college loyalty, they were able to actually engage across that difference. Now, where this is a little bit extreme, unless you're from Texas, and then you understand that this is actually not that extreme, this is life-threatening. What is important is that this skill can be used in all cases. You can make an assumption about someone and then find out you were wrong because that person actually has agency to then tell you what it is actually true about them. And then you kind of take your metaphorical pencil and erase what you thought was true and update it with the actual truth. That's all. That's called listening. It's weird. If you did do this, though, you would be able to go across your entire lived experience. This is just evidence that I'm from Texas. You could go through your entire lived experience and remember all the little curves and curveballs and accidents and moments in your life that all of this created who you actually are, how you actually turned out in the world. Nobody knew back then that I was going to end up like this. And then eventually it kind of became a pattern. And then eventually it's not that surprising. But what's important to understand is that no one else is responsible for who and how I am except for me. And that is the last thing we are mostly interested in doing, of reflecting on who and how we are and how we got to how we are with other people. But if we could possibly do this, then and only then would we understand what the actual point is. Now, what I mean by point is back in the 1900s, some of you will have to Google this. I went to college before the internet. So in studying diversity, we called it pluralism back then, and there was lots of talk about salads. Then we went to multiculturalism, which was a little bit more like a soup, possibly something with a heavy gravy. Then we went to tolerance. Then people started saying, oh, I don't want to be tolerated. Actually, you do want to be tolerated when you are not being tolerated. And then once you are tolerated, then you aim higher. So tolerance, then we went to awareness. Then we got to celebration, and that was way too loud for a lot of people. So we switched it and we called it diversity. Then we called it social justice, and then Glenn Beck had some things to say on his show, so that kind of ruined the word social justice for some. Then we started calling it equity and inclusion. And last time I checked, we're starting to use the word belonging as well. Now, the reason why I point out this kind of arc is that this is the damage of smarty-patardy academics coming up with new words and new theories for the same problem because they're not focusing on the point. The point is there is a house on fire. And most of us are mowing the lawn. So instead of mowing the lawn while a house is on fire, we could do something else. It might not solve the entire problem, but perhaps it's at least the right activity. So what I mean by this is if you picture a house fire and you're mowing the lawn or deciding what kind of curtains to put in, that is what I would call the wrong activity. If you are judging the family for letting their house get on fire in the first place, then you're waiting for someone else to change their behaviors. That's worked out great so far. I have made many mortgage payments because that's where people are trying to do, is they're fixing them because they are the problem. It's fantastic. I have another one due in just a couple of weeks. Keep it up. Or you can pick up a garden hose. The garden hose is likely not going to put out an entire house fire. That is true. But if we all did, it might. And it's at least the correct activity. That's an important piece when we start talking about taking a stand. Most of us have no idea what we would ever take a stand on because we've never had to question anything that we have ever believed because we just navigate in the water of which we believe. Probably the best lesson I learned from Mother Teresa's work, I'm a dork and I did all this archival research on my social justice heroes. So Mother Teresa questioned everything she believed. Now, whatever it is you believe, let's say politics, religion, pizza toppings, if it survives your own questioning process, you're just going to believe in it that much more. Great. Once you believe in it that much more, you can explain it to somebody else, and that is a much better recruitment tool than anger. Anger is not a very good recruitment tool. But most of us don't question what it is we believe. And when I, fun facts, ask, well, why do you believe that? The most common answer I get back is 'cause. Now, I went to college in Arkansas. 'Cause is a family member, not an answer. So that's not an option. Why do you believe what you believe? And if you can't do it, then you owe yourself the responsibility of questioning whatever it is you believe in. Even if my brother is one of those conspiracy theorist people, that's been working out great during social distancing. So while he's all super conspiracy theory, I constantly ask him, why do you believe this? And he sends me YouTube links. And I'm like, that is fantastic, but I don't care what they say. I want to know why you believe this. Sends me a YouTube link. It's working out wonderful. My house is very clean, at least dusting wise, because I watch all these YouTube links while I'm dusting. Things are polished. But he doesn't know what it is he believes in, and we can't communicate about it. So it just keeps him in like wackadoodleville to me, because I don't understand what he's connecting to with these YouTube videos. If he were to engage with me in a conversation, I think some of the things that I believe in, I have questioned enough that I would be able to explain. And to be honest, there are other things that I believe in that I'm like, no, I don't know. It just cuz. I do it too. But I'm responsible for the when I say cuz, and I'm responsible for when I'm comfortable actually reflecting on what it is I believe. To me, that is what I mean by taking a stand. I don't actually mean you have to literally stand up. And I certainly don't mean you have to stand up in some place where you actually feel endangered. But why do you believe what you do? Why do you stand in the puddle of your own values the way that you do? And if you question it and you come back to it, you're just going to believe in it that much more. Same thing goes with speaking out. Speaking also means listening. You have to be able to engage in conversations. And if you can engage in conversations with people across difference, that's part of your own questioning process. That's it. Most of us are like, oh, we're not allowed to talk about those topics. Well, that has certainly worked out awesome, because by not talking about opinionated things, we just stay polarized. That's super good if you're like in the t-shirt or bumper sticker industry. But what I'm actually trying to do is put out a house fire, which means we're going to have to like speak and listen and engage with one another to find out what it is that's actually happening. Most of the people who have like vehemently different politics, when we engage in a conversation, we realize we're actually very similar. We just kind of get to the same page from very different sides of the book. But at least we got to the same page. We find out what we do agree on. And then we also maybe find out a couple things that we disagree on. Okay, let's go out for pizza. This is not hard, but it's hard because we don't know how to do it. What is interesting to me, specifically when we start talking from our privileged and our dominant identities, is that, and I would even say kind of now inside of this COVID time with things kind of stripped away, people are not prepared to be uncomfortable. I'm sorry, you have to be prepared to be uncomfortable. You are currently uncomfortable because you feel ill-prepared. You're already in discomfort while you are reflecting on how lack of preparation you had to get uncomfortable in the first place. You are chasing your own tail. It's not about being comfortable or prepared to be uncomfortable. It's about getting to the fact that you should be wildly uncomfortable, because that actually means you're engaging in this one weird life that we have. Just like sitting back and being super comfortable is probably not really based in self-reflection, and it's not based in responsibility. It is very uncomfortable to realize how incongruent how I live my life is with who I want to be in the world. For example, I identify as a pacifist. However, I was raised in Texas, and my grandma taught me every single cuss word in the entire universe, and every deviation of it. That's not how you say that word. What's that word? Deviation, whatever. Conjugation. Let's say conjugation because it sounds smart. So every conjugation of every single cuss word that exists, I know. And I have to put a filter in because I am at work right now getting paid, and it's probably the first time I've made money since February. So let's keep this up. So if that's the case, that doesn't mean that I am going to not use cuss words that are deeply rooted in violence, if not sexualized violence, which gets to misogyny, also a different workshop, when I also identify as a pacifist. I tried for a whole year to not cuss. That's not true. I tried for a whole January to not cuss. And I decided that I have other things to do with my energy. So I bought a filter that I think I've done fairly good on. I'm a little out of practice because I know that cuss words or swear words can be like a distraction for people and you didn't pay for it. Okay, great. But I also know that that's how I know how to talk. And it's not congruent with identifying as someone who doesn't support violence. and it doesn't make any sense, and yet I do it. So I am responsible for the incongruence instead of just like Control-Alt-Deleting who I am in the world. I am actually a hot mess. Some of you have figured that out way quicker than me, but you are also a hot mess. Welcome to the team. I am more than happy to be the captain. Oh, Bradley says derivative. Thank you very much, Smarty Patardi. Being a hot mess is not what you are trying to fix. What you're trying to fix is doing the best you can with what you got, which is a hot mess. Doing the best you can with what you got some of the time is my life mantra. I don't know if y'all have been watching the Democratic National Conventions, yet another topic that you're not supposed to talk about, politics. But I am a little disappointed for humanity inside of a democracy that we have gotten to a bar in the, well, we haven't gotten to a bar because you can't go to a bar. We have lowered the bars to the point where Michelle Obama has actually endorsed the Democratic national candidate by saying Joe doesn't lie and believes in science. That's the qualifier now, is that someone doesn't lie and they believe in science? I am very worried about the future of our country. I am a constitutionalist. I have a lot more issues at stake than truth and science. But we have arrived at a place where that is a statement that the former First Lady has to say. We have a lot of stuff going on. I don't care who you vote for. That's actually not true. But I'm going to try really hard to not care who you vote for. I'm just going to ask for you to actually vote. It is amazing to me that as a leader of democracy on the globe, we have the lowest voter turnout of any country pretending to be a democracy. Go! Bring all your friends. Just actually vote. That would be super. Now, doing the best you can with what you got some of the time is the equivalent of doesn't lie and believes in science. This is a very low bar. Basically what it's saying, the hot mess pudding that you're currently sitting in, just, occasionally try. That might be hard. So just occasionally try to do the best you can with all that soup you got going on right now. And you don't have to do it 100% of the time, just maybe more than 0. If you can't do that, you are not participating in humanity. And that is ultimately what I'm asking you to do. Do the best you can with what you got some of the time. Now, how do we do this? The hardest step is noticing. Noticing does not mean judgment. Noticing means pay attention. Notice the patterns of your own behavior. Notice when you lean in, notice when you lean out, notice who your friends are, notice who your friends aren't, notice who you are on a sidewalk. Notice. Pay attention to your own patterns. You are responsible for them whether you're conscious of them or not. I posit that the most humanitarian based action we can possibly do is to become slightly more conscious of what we are unconscious of. That's it. Just try that. It's a full-time job. Bo, good luck. But if you can do that, you can become more conscious of what you are unconscious of, then you're actually claiming responsibility for who and how you are in the world. Responsibility is at the core of civility. It is at the core of most religious and spiritual practices. It is at the core of democracy. It is at the core of all political involvement. And it is the core of, by definition, what we mean by community. If we can be responsible for who and how we are, nobody else can do that for us, but we can do that for ourselves. Now, at the end of this, you're going to get an evaluation link, which is very important. And I'm a little scared of Whitney, so please do your assessment and your evaluation. But as a prize, you're going to get an assessment handout. So the assessment handout, you are welcome to be that person at work and decide you're going to do it where you work. But I challenge you that it's easier to do an external assessment than an internal assessment. This assessment tool you can also apply to yourself. If we were to ask a question like, what pictures do you have on the wall? I don't just mean at work, right? What pictures do you have on your Instagram account? What pictures do you have on this TalkTick or whatever it's called? Whatever those things are, who are you watching? Which gifts do you use? Where do you go and where do you not go? That's a self-assessment that is a really important starting place of this conversation. Now, I also told, Whitney gave me permission to say this, so I do also have this book club situation because you know how white people in the middle of an anti-racism movement like a book club. But what I also think is important is that I want to support the Postal Service. The reason why I want to support the Postal Service is that I want every single person to vote, and I don't want any of you to have to stand in line, because 6 feet apart, that line is going to be very long. And what I would like for you to do is to be able to play along. So if you are interested, I have every single kind of app and PayPal. But if you zap me $6, it will pay, I will give you my book. Now, the reason why you're giving me $6 is to pay for the envelope and the postage of wherever it is that you live. And yes, I will ship to Canada or wherever else I need to go. But for $6, I will mail you the book. It's called Good Enough Now, Doing the Best You Can with What You Got Some of the Time. But it has all the different activities of how to like be self-reflective of yourself, how to take responsibility of yourself, and fun facts, do it with a friend. So whoever was in your little networking group when you were sharing your smells and your pet peeves and what kind of food you crave, right? Get a buddy, do it that way. It's going to be great. If you want more of a structure, like a team development or something, that's kind of what the book club is for, and I'm happy to talk to you about it. But the $6 offer is just for you fun people, because support the post office. Do you see? I'm buying stamps. So again, the texting number is 202-670-4262 for those of you watching the recording or playing the home game. So what I think is probably the most important piece as we kind of like move into like the Q&A part, I have a couple of texts coming in, etc. The main thing that I want you to think about, like as far as whatever is next, is that if you are going to do the best you can with what you got some of the time, right now, you have experienced roughly 60 minutes that chances are you were not fully expecting. That's because a lot of diversity trainings are terrible. Some of you are like, well, she said stand-up comic, so I guess I'll take this one for the team, right? So however it is you're experiencing this particular thing right now, I want you just to take note. Some of this stuff is really easy for you. Some of this stuff is really hard for you. What do I mean by stuff? I don't know, because I don't know you. But what I do mean is that whether I'm talking about participating in this webinar, these conversations at work, your own family, what's happening in the world, what's happening in democracy, what's happening in the United States, what's happening on the globe, COVID, teaching your kids. I have never been more grateful in my entire life to not have children. Thank you, COVID. That's a fun thing. That's a fun hashtag. What has been good about this? Not a lot, but I don't have kids. Thank you, COVID. So, and I'm not making any kids because we did that earlier. Right, okay, so why I think this is very important is that if you are willing to identify what seems to come easy for you in this topic as you determine, then you can be responsible for what was already easy. Some of it is also really hard. Okay, that's fine. What's hard? You don't have to worry about why it's hard. You don't even have to fix it or clean it up or Windex it off. But just if you're doing the best you can with what you got some of the time, then you do need to know what are the obstacles? What's a challenge? Maybe there's certain topics or vocabulary words, or you're totally good with this and you're, yeah, down with, whoa, not that. That's where I draw the line. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that word means. I don't know what's going on. I heard about it on the internet. I don't know. Done. I have a good cable package and I've read a book about it. I have this one cousin. It's great. This is easy. This is hard. But if you can take responsibility for what is easy and hard in your own life, who else is going to take responsibility for that? So it's straight up 12:15. Again, I told you I was a little scared of Whitney. So 12:15, I have a couple of texts. I'm happy to text you back. I'm also going to scroll through the chat, but I want to make sure that you have a chance to like engage and talk, not just about easy and hard, but she's also going to set you up for what's next. What kind of promises are you going to hold? Do you need to hold yourself accountable to some kind of promise or some kind of next action? What I would recommend your next action be is to zap me, however you want to, Cash App, Zelle, PayPal, whatever, $6. And I will mail you a book in a fancy gold envelope even. $6. Happy to help. Whatever the little app you're choosing is Jess Pettitt. That's my name in my little square right there. But if I can help, I'm happy to help. So with that, Whitney, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Jess, let's do some Q&A. If you're getting some texts in, can we do like 5 minutes of Q&A? Or
you are clearly the boss, so yes, ma'am, I'd love to.
let's do that. Also, Jess told me earlier, if you guys want to just ask her directly and unmute yourself, feel free to do that as well. Or you can throw in the chat or text her.
Either way, now or even later, because I will be looking at my phone always because I am a proper Gen Xer. Okay, first question. What can I'm going to say do to encourage diversity in hiring at my company if I'm not in a hiring position? What an excellent starting question. So this one is about hiring, but basically the fundamentals of this question is, how do I make them do different stuff? I don't know how to make them do different stuff because I barely know how to make me do different stuff. So if you are on the search committee, you have a little bit more capability of letting the hiring process possibly change, right? But if you're not on the search committee, then basically what you're doing is outside of them, you're going, why y'all doing that? Why y'all doing that? They don't care because you're not one of them. So when I work with a company, one of the first things I do, and there's more about this in the book that's only $6, is that I have a kind of model of how people tend to show up in the world. Head, heart, and action. I interview everyone and I pick the strongest head person, the strongest heart person, and the strongest action person, and I make them the search committee, which means I have fired all the voluntold people who were previously on the search committee. I know that I have chosen well because these 3 people are sitting in a room going, why the hell am I sitting in the room with these 2 people? I don't even know who these people are. I've done well. So then these 3 people who normally don't work together will review the stack of resumes or whatever and actually pick stronger candidates. And then those candidates will actually have more people to connect with instead of just like the one person who used their social capital to fill out the rest of the search committee. So that is a way of like upending kind of how the system of a search committee is exquisitely designed to produce the results it gets. That's one of my favorite social justice quotes, Francis Kendall. Search committees are exquisitely designed to produce very bad hires. That seems ironic. Again, job security, but that's what I would do. But you can't do that if you're not even on the search committee. But you can from back here be like, well, why don't they do it that way? Why y'all doing it this way? Nobody cares what you think. You're not on the committee. So in the meantime, what kind of judgments and assumptions do you make that you think they are making? You probably do it too. Back to you, do your own work. Very frustrating answer, but an actually good answer. All right, do you have recommendations for what we can do to pick up a garden hose to help address the problem, or a good place to start to find those hoses? So first off, thank you for not asking a them question, because that's a you question. That's an excellent one. So number one, there are garden hoses everywhere, because it's actually a metaphor. So what I mean is that the best thing to do, which is picking up a garden hose, is to be responsible for who and how you are. That is literally the act of picking up a garden hose, because you're increasing your consciousness level of your unconscious behaviors, and then you're choosing to keep them or edit them, and you're responsible for them either way. That is the garden hose. If I do this, I am now role modeling to other people how they can also do it. Shh, they might actually start picking up garden hoses too. Fire goes out. Will you do this? No. Is that actually the answer? Yes, it is. Thank you. My mortgage is due soon. Do you have any recommendations for diversifying your team if you are not in the place to add more resources to them from the perspective of a manager? That's a them question. So one of the best things to do to add recommendations for diversifying your team, if you can't add new people to it, because there's nothing like pandering and tokenizing. That's a different workshop. What you can do is pay attention to the people who are already on the team and find out how diversity is present on the people who exist. Usually what we do is we hire people and we're like, we love your uniqueness. It's so great. And these skills are desperately needed. Now, if you could just assimilate and conform to everyone else on the team and like make sure you have the same signature and your office looks the same and you dress the same and you talk the same and the agendas are the same and the newsletter is the same and you eat the same lunch and you do everything the same and you park in the same spot. And if you could do that and possibly have the same virtual background and the same headphones and the same tone and the same fonts, if you could do that, but still be uniquely you, that would be wonderful. Stop doing that. Stop doing that. Don't do that anymore. Will you do that? No. Job security. All right, let's go over here. How do you zap? I think that possibly is not talking about electrolysis. That, because I got that hair yesterday morning. Some of you know what I'm talking about. I am assuming it means sending me money. So I am a capitalist. So I have every app on my phone. So you can use PayPal. You can use any of the little apps that send money. You can send me money on Facebook. You can even old school send me a check. However you would like. That is how you can zap me money. You also have my contact information. See how that works. Okay. How do you consider someone differently right when their views are hate views? Excellent question. There's a very big difference between differently right and yo wrong. There are people who are wrong. That is a true statement. I believe in one sense of morality. If what you are saying does not align with that sense of morality, I believe you are wrong. And something in your life taught you that this stuff is right. That's fascinating. We will get in a car wreck watching a car wreck. How is that any different than like, wow, your life taught you that, did it? Tell me more. What happened in your life that made you think those things? Somebody on this call, statistically speaking, is still stuck when I made fun of flat glober people. There are flat glober people. When I said the globe is three-dimensional, there's somebody somewhere, I'm related to one of them, who does not believe that. My brother does not believe that the world is three-dimensional. We had the same parents. What is wrong? I don't understand. Anyway, please tell me more. How did you get to this place that you believe these things? And if you can do it without being a judgmental jerk, because you can't call them a judgmental jerk if you are also being a judgmental jerk. Pink commie liberals, I'm going to repeat that one for you. You can't use the same divisive tools of the other side by saying, you're not welcome here because you have those terrible, horrible views. That's what they're saying about us, and they're right. So don't do that, but just be like, wow, how did your life teach you this information? Please lean into that conversation, because then you can learn where you actually have some commonalities. That's what differently right is. Their life taught them that this is how to feel safe and prepared. Your life taught you that this is how to feel safe and prepared. None of these things have to be based in facts. It's based on feeling safe and prepared. You have that in common. Now you can have a conversation. Okay, that's over 5 minutes. I have one more text and there's one more thing in the chat. Whitney, you're in charge.
Do you want to answer Amy's question in the chat? Because I think it's a perfect segue to your assessment tool.
Well, soups. Okay, Amy, you win. Do you have questions you recommend asking ourselves to identify where we may subconsciously lack inclusivity? I want to target areas I can work on. And go-to questions to start an unbiased audit of ourselves. That sounds like an excellent book project, doesn't it? Like almost like a thesis. I could have like chapters with like different process all the way through. Wait. That's what this is. You should do that. The assessment is a one-page PDF. It does not answer your life. The book doesn't either. It has a lot of pages in it that you get to write in. But that is what I'd recommend. The last thing I will say, and then I will shut up, but I will answer the other questions while typing. And please feel free to text more, 202-670-4262. The other thing I would say is that doing inclusion work is not a workout activity. So you can't be like, you know what I'm going to do? I actually do know what I'm talking about. I was raised by professional bodybuilders, which is why I have eating problems and body image issues. That's a different workshop. You can't be like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to work my upper body, right? Like I'm just going to do shoulders and lats and pecs and back. That's all. Then you have these little chicken skinny legs. We all know these people. These skinny legs, and you look like a martini glass. That's not helpful. So what ends up happening is we do inclusion work on the topics that we're really comfortable with, but we don't do inclusion work on the topics we don't know nothing about. So then we confuse our expertise as if it somehow like is a fart and the smell carries over so you become an expert on everything else. That is very dangerous because people assume you will then know about the area you have not done your work because they can smell some kind of familiarity. So you can't do it that way. You actually just have to like look at yourself. The first question of doing inclusion work is who do you exclude? I don't want to answer that question. Well, that's the starting place. So with that, I give it to Whitney.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. I cannot wait personally to use unicorn points in a conversation and see what happens. Because
I recommend it. It's not as controversial as some of the other topics I brought up.
Well, I just wanted to say quickly, thank you so much to Jess Pettitt for sharing your information and your wisdom with us today. I think we all had a really good time. I also wanted to mention that we will be continuing the conversation in our LinkedIn group. So I'm going to throw up the QR code, so you can go ahead and join our LinkedIn group when you get a moment. But basically, we would love to see you to get involved and continue the conversation there. You'll be getting a survey after the event. I'm going to include Jess's PowerPoint slides and her assessment, so you guys will all have access to that. And our next event is going to be on September 23rd. Registration is now open, and it's going to be the creator mindset, how to be more creative at work with Nir Bashan. So we're so excited. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great day, everyone.